All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar on segmentation, striking the right balance. My name is Michael Cross, and I am the Vice President of Operations at Networks Group. Joining me today is Scott Smith and Brad Stevens from our Managed Security Services and Engineering team. As I mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Operations. I oversee our corporate operations. I'm relatively new to the Networks Group team, but I've known Networks Group for quite a long time. In a previous role, I was CIO of a mid-size enterprise, and Networks Group was a great partner of mine that helped me build and manage a secure network for my environment. I've been in IT for over 20 years and been leading IT teams for mid-sized companies across many different industries. And when I'm not helping solve security challenges for our customers, I enjoy golfing, even though I'm not very good at it. And recently had a new addition to my family. We adopted a puppy on Sunday. And so he's been taking a lot of my free time right now as he's getting acclimated to his new home. Joining me is Scott Smith, our Director of Engineering here at Networks Group. He leads our engineering team and has been with Networks Group for over 20 years, architecting and implementing secure networks and security solutions for our customers. He is a key advisor to many of our customers when they're making decisions about how they can positively impact their security posture. And when Scott's not helping our customers with those things, he enjoys boating and camping with his family and takes every opportunity to ride his motorcycle, of course, when Michigan weather allows. Brad Stevens is our lead security engineer here at Networks Group. He's been with Networks Group for almost 7 years, supporting our customers' network and security needs. He brings over 20 years of IT admin, networking, and security experience from many different industries as well. And when he's not helping our customers with those needs, he's got 3 kids that he's spending time with on his personal watercraft and flying wireless battery-powered kites, which I'd love to learn more about, Brad. So Scott and Brad, thank you for joining today.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
Just want to give a brief overview of Networks Group. If you don't know who we are headquartered in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and we were founded over 24 years ago to help our customers solve their security challenges. Our customers are companies that understand the importance of security and are constrained on resources, whether that's people or budget or time. We offer services in 3 basic families, starting from the right-hand side: compliance. This is a foundation for us. Compliant doesn't necessarily make you secure, but it is a foundation that many organizations work off of. We are a PCI QSA company, and we also do consulting services and other frameworks as well, like NIST. Our defensive security family of services is where Scott and Brad spend most of their time. This is where we help customers design, deploy, operate, and defend secure networks. We do this across organizations, large and small, lots of different industries and lots of different topologies and geographies. This gives us broad visibility to security challenges that our customers are facing today. And then our third family of services is our offensive security. This leverages the visibility we get from our customer environments, as well as a wealth of other threat intelligence to stay current on TTPs that our attackers are using today. We approach our customers similarly to how attackers would approach their environment and can provide great insights as to how an attack might unfold against a given organization and help provide a remediation roadmap that allows for risk-informed decision-making. Our agenda today, we're going to talk about segmentation, but first we're going to start about a little bit about the history of networks, defining what segmentation is, some of the challenges that organizations face when working on segmentation, what does it take to properly segment a network and an environment, and we'll wrap up with some key takeaways and how Networks Group can help you along this journey. We will have time at the end of the conversation today for some Q&A. There is an option in your screen down on the bottom. You'll see a Q&A button. If you click on that, you can submit questions to us, and we'll be happy to answer those as time allows. Also know that this webinar is being recorded. We will have this published out on our LinkedIn page and our YouTube page here shortly, so you can watch it again or send it on to friends and colleagues. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Brad to talk a little bit about the history of networks. Brad?
Thanks, Michael. If you're tuning in to hear about token ring and coax cabling, that's not the history of networks we're talking about. I'm kind of going to key in on the history of networks as related to security. I guess to get where we are today, we kind of need to have a history of how networks evolved and probably where most networks are sitting at currently. So I'm going to jump right in. Back in the 90s, pretty much everyone was just plugging in a bunch of computers into a hub and were happy when it worked. There was no design in the model. I pretty much called it like Yahoo networking before yahoo.com was even a website. You just exclaimed Yahoo when you got it working. And that's kind of how it was back then. Security just didn't exist other than the one password, which was, quote, password that you used for everything. Security of networks really started to evolve when we added more complexity. We started adding, remote connectivity, T1 links to another site, and ultimately some sort of broadband internet connection, as opposed to the 56K modems we were using previously to that. This really introduced the concept of trust versus untrust networking. We all had this single trusted network with all these computers on the inside that talked to each other, and the internet was considered untrusted. And maybe if you were, in the latest best practice, you had a DMZ where you had a web server or something, but pretty much more than likely you had a mail server with public access or a web server that was on your trusted network that everyone had access to, and everyone internal had unrestricted internet, and life was pretty much grand, right? I mean, we could just do whatever we wanted. The first,
Brad, to jump in real quick,
yeah.
Just wanted to ask about, you have organic networks, and I know we see it all the time, but how often are we still seeing networks that have just been built and built and built over time instead of redesigned with security in mind?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Yeah, it's pretty common. Everyone's network, most networks we come across today are still in this same form factor. You have a trusted internal network with an untrusted external, and that's the extent of it. And what we're going in today is kind of going to expand on that, the concept of what's trusted and what's untrusted. And segmentation is the key part of that. This brings me to the first public internet accessible machine I put on the internet. Pretty much got defaced by a hacker or a script of some sort that defaced my web page, and that was pretty much the extent of the hack. It was pretty common, and the only security thought was keeping the bad guys out by securing the internet connection and maybe patching your web server so this didn't happen. That security model we called perimeter security or border security, and lately it's been referred to as north-south traffic flow, traffic traveling internal to external, as north-south, and traffic traveling between workstations and servers is kind of east-west, but we're going to get more on that later. I don't want to dwell on that. Kind of want to get to the history of where we are or where we came from to get to where we are now. Basically, as technology progressed, we evolved these networks. We added internal routers to split up networks and to add remote sites, and it was mainly done for performance, but it didn't really add any security. As technology progressed, we got layer 3 switching, which simplified physical connections, but again, it didn't really add any security. So the result of this is that basically all these, like Scott said, organically grown networks are basically still what people have today. They're undocumented, they're open, there's free flow of traffic internally, and the only restrictions are internal to external. And every time something was added, it introduced complexity, but there was really no security thought built into it. the problem is as networks evolved, so did the hackers and the bad actors, which brings us kind of to today's networking challenges and the need for proper segmentation in this concept of trusted networking versus zero trust networking. And that's kind of where I want to go next. So history aside, we're now at the point where we realize that we need to divide our networks into smaller compartments. At the core, segmentation is really dividing networks into smaller networks, and the main purpose of this is to gain network visibility and to add security. This can be done physically, virtually. It can mean moving cables. It can mean adding VLANs. It really depends on what kind of hardware you have. But at the core of this is really what we call zero trust networking, and segmentation is the key part of this. What does zero trust actually mean? It's the principle of least privilege, meaning that if you're in accounting, you only get access to what accounting people need and nothing else. And it's not a product, it's a model of security. It's the first step in a layered security model. You really can't accomplish any more security without first having this baseline of segmentation and knowing what traffic goes in and out of your network and across your network segments. There's a lot of buzzwords out in the industry. You hear people talking about micro segmentation, east-west. It's not a buzzword. It's a model, and you can't sell it as a oh shoot, I lost my train of thought. You can't sell it as a product. It's really a process.
Right, I wanted to just jump in here, and since we're talking about segmentation and what it really is, and we can talk a little about where it came from, meaning people started segmentation by breaking things down, but that's not where segmentation is now, right?
Correct. Yeah, segmentation originally was done really for performance. Today it's done for security, and that's the key we're talking about here with segmentation. So what does segmentation or what does zero trust really mean? It's that not trusting any part of your network. It used to be you only distrusted the internet. Now you distrust everything because the way the hackers have migrated their tactics. It's not just the internet that's the problem. So one of the key problems, or say challenges, not problems, with segmentation is what we're going to talk about next. And at the start of 2020, pretty much only 20% of companies had segmented networks. And where we want to go is why is that? And why are people resistant to segmentation? And the key is there's no easy way to do it. There's no easy button. You can't just buy a product and say, I have security. It's a process. I'm a gearhead and I don't have a sales bone in my body, but anyone selling some buzzword claiming it's the easy way to get you segmented and get you secure, they're really trying to sell you something. This is 100% a process. And we see this all the time. People are resistant to it because they really don't have time. There's resource constraints. IT staff is very busy. Taking care of day-to-day operations, and security is always, not always, but most of the time put to the side. I spent many years myself as an IT administrator, a director, and I spent a large portion of my time being distracted by, managers who didn't want to talk to desktop support because their mouse was broke, or they're, fielding complaints about the password complexity you put on your network. For security, and maybe resetting passwords or approving orders for ergonomic keyboards. It's distraction after distraction. And so you really don't have time to spend on security. So it gets kind of pushed to the back burner. So, that's definitely a serious problem. The other problems we see are overwhelming prospect of implementation. You know you need security, but it's just where do you start? And hopefully we'll try to answer some of those questions today. Other things we see is pushback from leadership and users. One big one, not really related to segmentation, but multi-factor user authentication. You know, we hear from IT professionals across the industry, well, the users will be mad at, you know, it takes too much effort to do multi-factor authentication. You know, it's kind of a necessity. You just have to kind of get over it. Also to cost and time, you know, you push back, you know, it costs too much or it takes too much time to do security. So we're just going to keep putting it off, which is, you know, ends in usually bad scenarios. We hear issues from customers that there's, you know, they're scared of implementing security because it will impact users. You know, there's always some sort of problem when you introduce a new security concept and somebody may not be able to have access to a system they really need to do business. You know, they don't have time for new tickets because they're already overwhelmed. So it goes back to that time constraint of IT staff.
And Brad, I just want to jump in on the fear of impact, because it really is something that we see every day when we talk to our customers. They are terrified that it's going to increase the workload of the IT staff and help desk and support. But you know, the fear of impact can't outweigh the security benefit and security risk. So it is extremely common to have that. I don't want this to break something. I don't know where to look if it does break something. It adds another layer of troubleshooting. But in reality, you know, if it's configured right, if it's constructed right, then you don't have that. But there's a lot of pieces that you'll get to that have to be done, I know, to make sure that that's done properly.
Yeah, I agree. If you do enough research and documentation ahead of time, you can minimize the impact. And this is a really common problem that we run across with people fearing the impact. The goal is obviously to mitigate the impact, and but that's not always possible. And there sometimes is impact, but again, we try to mitigate it when we do this stuff. Some of the other issues we see is configuration and design mistakes. One of the most common I see whenever I come across a new network I'm trying to help with is asymmetric routing. You know, the design is done in a way that creates an asymmetric route. When you include a firewall with stateful inspection, it breaks some things. And if you don't account for that up front and configure it the right way, you know, it definitely can be a problem. So doing this on your own might introduce something like that. The other thing we see with designing configuration is over or under segmentation. People over segment and try to create too many network segments, which creates a management nightmare. They just can't manage it or get their arms around it. It's just too big. So there's a delicate balance there between over and under segmenting networks in regards to security administration.
Right, I think you have an example there. We had a customer some time ago that maybe went the path of over segmentation. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, I saw a customer who we introduced them to the concept of segmentation. They went kind of crazy and made it, you know, like 14 different server networks, and they were all very small. And he quickly found out that he couldn't make he couldn't make do with all the rules needed to allow the traffic between those 13 different segments. We've also had customers ask, you know, what if we just put every user in their own network? And again, it just becomes unwieldy. You can't create enough rules to make that happen in a segmented network. So it's really a balance in that scenario. We're getting stuff grouped together in the right order and creating rules that are manageable, but also restrictive enough to give you the segmentation you need. Thank you, Michael. So another thing that we run into is hardware constraints. We've seen customers come in with open networks that have unmanaged or small office class, home office class switches that just can't do the job that's needed. Not fully. They could do a partial segmentation, but not a full segmentation that's really required. Also, we see, undersized firewalls that just can't handle the traffic that needs to be pushed through them to make segmentation a reality. So that's another sticking point for people who are trying to do this on their own. The real challenge is getting the balance between security and business needs mixed with manageability and usability. Like I said, if you over segment, it becomes unmanageable. If you under segment, you don't have the security you need. And all in the meanwhile, business needs might get impacted if you're restricting too much. So there's really a delicate balance there that we've kind of learned to navigate over the years. Excuse me.
So Brad, I love this analogy that you put together about why segmenting. I think this is a great way to, as you're talking with business leaders, to trying to understand the concept of segmentation. It's a great way to have that conversation.
Right. So if you're a technical person and you want to explain this to untechnical people, I like this analogy. So I try to think of this a computer network as like people in a room. If you put 1,000 people in a room talking all at once, and you're trying to talk to someone on the other side of the room, you have to yell or move through the room to talk. And that's very inefficient. You can't hear what people are saying, et cetera, et cetera. It's the same thing with computers. You get 1,000 computers on a network, all broadcasting their information, and it's inefficient and performance is reduced. If you split those people up into smaller rooms, suddenly becomes very easy to talk. You can talk in a normal voice. You don't have to wade through a crowd of people. You're not yelling. It's more efficient. So with segmentation, this was kind of in the history, you gain a boost in performance or efficiency per se, not necessarily performance. You can lose performance if you're used to a 10 gig physical connection through a layer 3 switch, and then you start shoving all this traffic through a firewall. That might be a reduced performance in some people's minds, but ultimately, if the traffic supports it, this is actually a boost in performance to split up networks, and we see it all the time. It's one of the big worries that people have when we tell them we have to put all this traffic through a firewall. They're like, well, we have 10 gig, how is this going to be faster? And physically it's not faster, but efficiency wise it is faster. So we have that conversation a lot. But the main purpose of why segment is security. With everyone in the same room, all the computers in the same network, you get this problem of, if one computer gets infected or one person gets the flu, comes back into the network, everybody gets sick. It just spreads like wildfire because there's no restrictions. Everyone's just shaking hands and hugging and spreading the virus like crazy. You split these people into small rooms. You have security guards at the doors. You tell them, they can't talk to each other unless they absolutely have to. And one person leaves, gets sick. They come back, and maybe only one room gets sick, but you don't get the whole 1,000 people sick. So you're limiting the exposure, and that's really where segmentation has its heyday. And on top of that, you get visibility. 1,000 people in a room hanging out, you have no idea who's talking to who. It's just a free-for-all. Same thing in computer networks. You start segmenting people and pushing them through a firewall. The traffic's logged. Now you know who's talking to who and what's normal traffic and maybe what's not normal. And that's where you can introduce layers of security that alert you to issues on your network.
I'm going to jump in here, Brad, for this next slide. Let you rest your voice a little.
Thank you, Scott.
So just want to talk a little about the security advantage of segmentation. And I'm not going to read the slide. Anybody can read the slide and go back to it. I want to focus on a couple areas. So really it's, we know it's data protection, access control, those things, but threat containment and separation endpoints really is to me, one of the biggest security advantages of properly segmenting. And we'll get into it in a little bit of a case study, but if you have proper threat containment, then only the things that are allowed to talk in a specific way would be impacted, kind of like Brad's analogy, right? Of someone is sick and goes into a room, they only infect that room, not every other room in the place. With historically with flat networks or even VLAN networks, that are separated but routed without security in between, without something like a next-gen firewall, you're not going to be able to stop that spread. Whereas with properly segmented networks, you're just going to limit that exposure to that tiny segment. And when I say tiny, it doesn't mean one device or two. It can be 100 devices, it can be 1,000 devices, but really it's about trying to break everything down into small chunks to get to that point. So yeah, to me, the biggest security advantages are going to be that threat containment and the separation of those endpoints.
Thank you, Scott. So this next slide, basically I'm going to read it to you. It's basically 77% of IT professionals believe that network segmentation can prevent server compromise. And that's from SANS Institute. Boy, I can't talk. Nearly 60% of attacks involve lateral movement from VMware. And this stat was from earlier in the slide. At the start of 2020, only 20% of companies had segmented networks. And I hate to read to you slides when Scott just said he wasn't going to read slides, but I feel these are kind of important stats.
They are, Brad. And I want to jump in on that 20% of companies had some segmented networks, because I'm sure a lot of people are saying, oh no, I have segmented networks. I'm sure most people do. We're talking about proper segmentation with security, with visibility. We're not talking about just, I have 10 different VLANs or 100 different VLANs. That is not segmentation in today's attack surface, in today's world. That is segmentation from 10 years ago.
Yeah, that goes back to my history. You got segmentation from the year 2000, where you just had a layer 3 firewall or a layer 3 switch that routed some traffic, but really no security between them.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So when we say 20% of companies had segmented networks, that's what we're talking about, is real, properly segmented networks, not just VLANs.
Yep. Very good point. Thank you, Scott. So that brings me to kind of my next point, which is a case study. We recently had a customer call in and on a Monday morning and tell us that their network had been compromised with a ransomware attack. So this was a really big deal. Basically, the ransomware infiltration came about by in an admin account that wasn't protected by two-factor authentication. They had an open network with one large network with various site-to-site VPNs to all their different sites with an open rule base, meaning all networks could talk to all networks, so that they were like that example from 10 years ago. Segmented, yes, but restricted, no. They were completely open. And the result of that was the bad actors had a chance to gain control of their domain controllers and then proceed to encrypt every single Microsoft server and workstation across all their sites, the main site, which was flat, and all their remote sites, which were connected via VPN.
And I want to jump in and add to this a little. Brad, you mentioned the two-factor, or I should say the account without two-factor. Just so everybody understands, having things like backup accounts or accounts to manage devices, just in case, let's say two-factor isn't functional, isn't really an option anymore. And that's what happened with this case. It was meant to be give me a backdoor that I can manage my devices with that doesn't have two-factor in case it's broken. It ended up being the downfall, and everything got encrypted just because of one single account.
Yeah, very good point.
So Brad, just to think about this case study, right? Let's assume for a moment that two-factor was missing on that admin account, and a bad guy got access to those credentials and got in. how would segmentation have helped in this case?
Well, in this case, if you had proper rules in place that didn't allow the side-to-side movement, you know, they might have gained access to one computer on the inside, and if there was proper segmentation in place, they wouldn't be able to spread the encryption algorithm to all the workstations or all the other servers. You know, maybe they only encrypted one server versus every single computer and every single server in the organization. It's really about containment and limiting their ability to move once they've gained their foothold in the network. And that's really what we're talking about here, is trying to slow them down and limit their availability to the rest of the network.
Yeah, ultimately, and we see this every day, and everyone that's listening to this should know it's not a matter of if you'll be compromised, it's a matter of when and what the scope is of that compromise. Ultimately, there will always be something, there will be some way for someone to get in. The question is, what is the impact to the business?
Right. In this case, you know, they could have paid the ransom and maybe got their encrypted, their data unencrypted, and including their backups. But in this case, it was weeks of rebuilding servers and workstations. And if you're looking to sell security to your leadership, you know, ask them if weeks of downtime it was okay, you know, versus or paying a large sum of money, which is illegal, by the way, to these guys to get your data back, and even then, it's not guaranteed. So you know, I went back to the statistics slide. I'm really one of those 77% of people that think this could be avoided, or at least minimally reduce the impact if proper segmentation and zero trust segmentation had been implemented. And doing it after the fact is no fun, let me tell you.
So what is it going to take, Brad? What do you need to do?
Yeah, so thanks, Michael. Doing it the right way really requires discipline and diligence. It's not taking the easy way out and just, there's no easy button. You can't just make it work and then walk away. You really have to create a culture of security first, followed by the functionality. You know, it's got to work, obviously, because that's what's required for your business. But you also have to maintain a consciousness for practicality. You know, you can't put every person in their own network and segment to 1,000 degrees. You know, it just doesn't work. So you got to have that balance. You also have to have leadership buy-in. This doesn't work, and you have to have user buy-in as well. I can't say just leadership. You have to have everybody on board. If one person circumvents your security policy because it's too hard or they don't want to, you know, that's the Achilles heel. You're dead in the water. So you really have to get everybody's buy-in to this. You have to have IT and the security team to have the power to dictate security versus allowing leadership or the users to dictate your security. So that's a really important part. The other part of this is really, you know, segmentation requires sending all your traffic through a firewall, a next-gen security device. You know, whether it's one or two, or I recommend one for management purposes. You know, you start getting the multiples, it gets really difficult, but you have to be able to control this traffic and log it. Otherwise, you don't know what's going on. You know, like I said, go back to that 1,000 people in a room. You just have no idea who's talking to who without this. You know, that requires maybe a hardware investment, maybe it doesn't. It definitely involves time, planning, documentation. You got to implement this. You know, it's a process. It also requires an ongoing maintenance. You know, this isn't a fire and forget type process. You have to, you know, we're not talking about licensing and support. That's kind of a given. You have to audit your network. You have to clean up firewall rules when you turn down a service that maybe your business doesn't need anymore. You have to have a life cycle process and document what you're installing and uninstalling, so that you're not allowing traffic to servers that maybe don't exist anymore. You put in a new server. If you didn't clean up the old server, well, that might have access that someone could use to penetrate your network, and you want to avoid that.
And I think that's a big point, what you just said there, Brad, about documentation and follow-up, because everybody, I'm sure, has seen it, but we see it every single day, even with change management, is I have an initiative, I need this thing opened. It gets opened 2 years later, 3 years later, it's no longer in use. Nobody ever stops, shuts that from being open. Nobody ever removes the rules. Nobody ever removes access, right?
Yeah, correct. I mean, there's all the time people turn down a server and then don't think to update their firewall and remove that access. And that's really a security hole that could be used in the future to penetrate your network. It's a very good point. And that leads into documentation. I mean, and updating documentation as you work through segmentation and create this process of security. You should have really good documentation. If you don't have it now, and most people don't, it really helps with this process. You need a network diagram. You need to have a way to explain to new people who may come into your organization how your network works and what the traffic flow is. Too many times I've seen undocumented networks, and the IT guy leaves who designed it and built it, and he had it all in his head. I mean, I was that guy at one point. I knew the network in and out. I never had it documented. You go to that one person for how does this flow, and they're no longer there. They've left, or they failed to pass the bus test, as I call it. They're just not there, and you can't document something, or you just don't know. So you really need to document. I've seen it too many times. A new IT administrator inherits a network, and they have no idea what's going on in their network or what traffic goes where. So documentation is a key factor in this.
For sure. Brian, I'm going to jump in here before we move on to the next slide, because we had a question come in. And just a reminder to everyone who's attending today, we are taking questions. If you have any questions for the panelists today, just put that Q&A button at the bottom and type in your question. We'll get to it at the end. But we had one come in a few minutes ago, and it's almost as if this individual knew our slide deck, because their question was, Brad, this sounds really hard and really complicated. How do I start? Where do I begin? Well, we got a slide for that, don't we, Brad?
Yeah, exactly. Well, where do you start? It really comes down to dedicating a resource to get this done, because I mean, time constraints is one of the big problems. So dedicate some time to security, to segmentation. Whether it's an hour a week, mark it off in your calendar. Don't let people interrupt you. And then start with something small, something known, or something easy, and just get it done and keep moving forward. It might be something as simple as, I'm installing a new application server next week. Let's start off with making this one secure, writing it, documenting it, writing it down, and doing it the right way. Don't just throw it on the network and say it works and walk away from it. And that's the easiest place to start. And then once you get that done, you move on and maybe move to another application or another server that you can start segmenting and moving out of the big cluster of computers into something more secure.
Right. I think that's a really good point with starting small. And we run into this all the time, is we have customers ask, why should I do this one thing if I haven't done all the rest of the stuff? The rest of my network's at risk. Why should I start with doing this one thing the proper way? And really, it's exactly what we talked about, right? Threat containment. And does it hurt to do one properly? No, you just gain from that.
No, in the event of our case study, if one server was segmented properly and it didn't get encrypted, that's a win. You're not rebuilding that one server. That's something off your to-do list in the horrible event that it was encrypted. So it's definitely a good way to start. So I would encourage anyone who's wanting to get started, just start with something small and get it done. And if your hardware doesn't support it, great. that's fine. You can still do something. You don't have to completely redesign your whole network in one sitting.
The next point that you're coming up on with leadership, I'd really like to ask Michael to talk a bit about this, because I know he's been in that position and had to try to change the thought process of the organization and leadership for security. Can you talk about that, Michael?
Yeah, happy to do so. Yeah, so Brad alluded to it earlier of getting that culture of security, getting buy-in from your users, and really starting with your leaders to get that buy-in to your security strategies and things like segmentation that you're trying to implement. Getting their buy-in will help you get user buy-in as well. Those conversations aren't necessarily easy. Put yourself in the shoes of a CFO or a CEO. Their life isn't IT, their life isn't security and segmentation, but I guarantee you that they're worried about it and they're looking to you for help, right? So try to have conversations with them where you're not actually talking about the technical ins and outs. Don't talk acronyms, don't talk technology. Talk in terms and things that they can understand and consume. Brad's analogy about segmentation earlier with the room with 1,000 people in it. That's a great way to have that segmentation conversation with a leader that doesn't understand segmentation, because they can relate to. They've all been to a conference where they're one of 1,000 people in a room and they're trying to talk to the one guy and they can't hear him or they can't find him, whatever. So there's something you can relate to right there. Another thing to think about is relating the conversation to risk. Leaders, CEOs, CFOs, business risk is where they live. That's their life. So if you can translate this effort into a risk management discussion, so you're reducing risk. This is how we're going to help reduce risk. This is how we're going to get it from tier to tier. That's a great way, again, to kind of relate that information to a leader to help get them to buy into the program.
Thanks, Michael. And that really leads into budgeting, my next point, which is budgeting for what you need going forward. If you've had the discussion with leadership, you want to improve your security. Maybe your hardware isn't capable of handling all the traffic you want to put through it. You need new switches, or you need a larger firewall that can handle the processing power of segmenting all your networks. Budget for what you need going forward. So do what you can now, but plan on replacing that hardware if you need to going forward, and that'll get you going in the right direction. And that's planning out the additional steps. That's the first step. Getting this segmented is really the core. The core to all future security needs. Segmentation is really the foundation of all other modern security is built upon. You can't do a SIEM or alerting and detection if you don't have this information logged. Michael, can you go to the next slide?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's really my number one point here in the key takeaways is, you cannot do those things without segmentation. If you have those 1,000 people in the room talking to each other and you don't know what they're saying to each other, how can you alert upon a weird conversation? You just can't. So that's this is really the key to building upon your security posture. You also have to, like I said just recently, is budget for these resources. Get leadership involved, sell it to them. This is an important. It's challenging, but it's worth it. I can tell you don't want to be in the shoes of our case study where they're rebuilding their entire network with weeks of downtime. Nobody likes that. Leadership doesn't like it. Your customers don't like it. It's a bad scenario for everybody. And this is, segmentation is really in today's world an absolute necessity. The hackers are once they get in, they're just moving about freely. And if you don't segment, there's no way to tell that you're going to be doing this. There's no way to tell to know that they're doing this until it's too late. And that's really the key here.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. So I'm going to jump in here. We're just about wrapping up here. We do have some time left over. for some Q&A, and we'll get to those here in just a moment. But before we do, I just want to talk a little bit about how Networks Group can help you in your segmentation journey. You've seen this slide. It was at the beginning of the conversation, but I've highlighted here some areas where Networks Group can help you in this journey. On our managed security services side, discovering your environment. What do I have in my environment? How's everything connected? Brad talked a lot about documentation, network diagrams, understanding the flow of data. Discovery services can really help with that. And then designing and managing secure networks where segmentation is a core. Brad and Scott spend a lot of their time with our customers working on architecture, design, and then maintaining these properly segmented networks. So that's an area we can help. And then the last thing I'll mention is on the offensive side of our business. Once you've gotten down a path there, or not just with segmentation, but with your entire security strategy, how do you know that it's actually working? How do you know that it's doing the things that you think it's doing? Well, let's have a bad guy come at it and see where they can get in, see where the exposures are. Our offensive security, our full scope penetration test really can help with identifying those blind spots, those areas, and testing your defenses to make sure that you're accomplishing the things that you think you're doing with your security program, and get a report of recommendations. These are areas where you can focus on to increase your posture. Last note I'll make is our next webinar in this series. We've been doing them once a month. We got our next one scheduled. Our webinar next month is going to be turning your detection capabilities with purple teaming. Our guest speakers will be Megan Orlando and Mike Staley from our offensive security business, and they're going to be talking about purple teaming. It's a great program. It's a great way to work hand in hand with the bad guys to test your defenses and see how they're working and see how your detection is working. That webinar is scheduled for September 29th at 1 o'clock. And if you go out to our LinkedIn page, Networks Group LinkedIn page, you'll see we've just published that event, so you can go there and register for it. As of right now, it's live today. So before we get into Q&A, I just want to take a moment to thank both Scott and Brad for the information you've provided today. This is great information. Thank you very much for your time. Got a couple of questions. First one, I think I'm going to direct to you, Brad, first. This one came in from an attendee. What logic do you use or recommend for segments? Asset criticality, trust zones, asset exposure levels, departmental, etc. At the end of the day, how do I determine how I segment?
Sorry, I want to jump in front of Brad on this one because I just had this conversation with another client recently because it really just came up. So as far as segmentation and how you do it, what logic you use, there is no one way ever. And this is kind of the idea behind even zero trust. There is no cookie cutter way to do segmentation, to do zero trust. So it has to work for your business. So really the usual way that we would say start is by identifying data, the most critical data, of course, but even data outside of that. That's going to determine what your segmentation needs to look like. So if you have 3 HR servers that all HR has access to that are pretty much all working in conjunction, that can be a zone, if you will, or a segment. We also look at things like, does it have any exposure to the internet? Should it be in a DMZ? Is it doing any other functions? Which we see all the time with database servers, right? Is that somebody will have a database server that's serving multiple different business units for different things. Should that really be even broken down into different database servers is a question. So it really starts with documenting what the data is that's important, and then breaking out who needs access, why they need access, how they need access. It comes down to an entire zero trust model. Brad, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'm going to mirror exactly that, Scott. It comes down to that balance between administration and functionality. creating 1,000 rules for 1,000 servers is difficult. So if you can group them logically into, all database servers going to need, a certain TCP port 1433 because it's Microsoft SQL. That's great. You can save yourself some administration cycles to do that. It really is business dependent and application dependent. So it's learning, it's documenting and learning. For us, it's learning our customers' networks. For people who know their networks, it's knowing their networks and then applying what's logical for that business unit.
Yeah, it used to be easier to segment because you could just say, this is my trusted zone, this is my workstation zone, this is my server zone, right? That kind of scenario. And this is the internet, and that's bad. And now it's much more detailed. What are the servers doing? Who needs access to them? What applications are they hosting? When do people even need access? During the day, middle of the night? All of this stuff matters and should all be documented. So really, it's a difficult journey, and I've talked about zero trust even on the remote work webinar that I did last time, and it's not an easy thing to do. It requires a lot of documentation, but it gets you down the path of being able to build your policies and your security based on what you wrote down, based on your documentation of what's important to the business.
Another question that's just come in. I'm going to shoot this one to you, Scott, because I think you touched on it a little bit earlier. But the question is, I got a lot of VLANs in my environment, but they don't go through a firewall. Are you saying that my environment's not secure?
Yes, that is exactly what I would say. If you're routing networks internally, but not controlling the access and flow of data and don't have any visibility into what that is, then it's not secure. This is where segmentation has changed over the years. A lot of people have VLANs all over their network for different servers. And in some cases, it might be broken down by business unit, which is great. But then they're all routing them at a switch level or a router and not providing proper security. And even if they do have, let's say, access lists at the switch or router level, it's not good enough anymore. We need to see more of the application. We need to see more of what might be happening inside of that application to be able to detect threats and then contain them. Just having basic security of saying, allow this port here doesn't work, not in this day and age.
Yeah, I want to add to that and say you need traffic patterns to know if, the 3 a.m. huge spike in SQL traffic is legitimate or not, right? I mean,
yeah,
that could be, someone exfiltrating data out of your network that you need to know about.
Well, and thinking about ports, because I mentioned it, saying I need port 443 for HTTPS allowed, what can talk over that? I can guarantee you there's a lot of bad stuff that can talk over that port. But do you really want to allow it? That's where you need to see what's happening at that layer 7, at that application layer, instead of just port network layer.
Sure, I can allow websites on 443, but do we really want all my employees, browsing Facebook all day instead of doing their work?
All of it matters, yeah.
All over 443, so application is important as well.
All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap up here, gentlemen. Scott and Brad, thank you again. We definitely would love to have further conversations with any of you. If you want to talk more about segmentation, have more questions for Scott and Brad, feel free to reach out to us, sales@networksgroup.com, up here on the screen here, or the phone number. You give us a call. We're happy to have further conversations with you. Again, as a reminder, this webinar has been recorded. It will be out on our LinkedIn page here shortly, so feel free to reference back to that and send it on to your colleagues. And to those who have joined today, thank you for joining. We appreciate taking the time out of your busy schedules to hear about this. It's important stuff, and we want to make sure that it's getting out there. So thanks again for joining. That's all we have today. So everyone have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.